At first, an avoidant doesn't usually realize how deeply they feel about someone. That's what makes their behavior so confusing. They can spend months acting emotionally distant, inconsistent, or even cold, while secretly being more attached than they want to admit. Because for an avoidant, feelings are never the hard part. The hard part is what those feelings demand from them emotionally. Real love creates emotional responsibility. It asks for vulnerability, consistency, openness, reassurance, and emotional presence. And those are the exact things avoidants learned to protect themselves from long ago. So instead of leaning into their feelings, they unconsciously create distance from them. They distract themselves, stay busy, disappear emotionally, or convince themselves they just need space. But eventually, something starts changing inside them. And what finally forces an avoidant to face their true feelings for you is usually not your chasing, your begging, or your constant reassurance. It's your emotional absence. Because avoidants are incredibly good at suppressing emotions when they know you're still there. As long as they feel emotionally safe, knowing you haven't fully left, they can continue avoiding what they feel. They tell themselves things like, "She'll always understand me. He's not going anywhere. I can deal with this later. I just need more time." But the moment your energy truly changes, something shifts psychologically. Not fake distance, not manipulation, real emotional detachment. When you stop over-explaining, when you stop trying to force closeness, when your attention slowly leaves them, when your emotional availability is no longer guaranteed. That's when the avoidant nervous system starts panicking in silence, because now for the first time they can no longer rely on emotional control. And avoidants often confuse control with safety. They feel safest when they can manage distance on their own terms. But once they feel you emotionally slipping away beyond their control, the emotions they buried begin rising to the surface. Suddenly, memories hit harder. The conversations replay in their head. Your presence feels louder in your absence. Small things start reminding them of you. Songs, routines, places, even random moments during the day begin triggering emotions they were suppressing for months. And this is the part most people misunderstand. Avoidants do not always process emotions in real time. Many of them process emotions after distance happens, after silence, after separation, after they finally have enough emotional space to feel what they couldn't feel while intimacy was directly in front of them. Because closeness overwhelms them, but distance creates reflection. That's why an avoidant may seem emotionally disconnected during the relationship, then suddenly become emotional once they lose access to you. It's not always fake. It's delayed emotional processing. And when that delayed processing finally starts happening, it becomes harder and harder for them to escape their real feelings, especially when they realize you're no longer emotionally waiting for them. One of the biggest things that forces an avoidant to finally confront their true feelings for you is seeing that your life continues without them. That realization hits them much harder than people think. Because avoidants are used to emotional distance not having permanent consequences. In many of their past connections, people stayed. People chased harder. People kept reaching out, explaining, fixing, waiting, forgiving. So deep down, avoidants often develop an unconscious belief that emotional closeness will always remain available to them later. That's why they delay vulnerability. They think, "I'll deal with this eventually. I just need more time. They'll understand. I can come back later." But when they suddenly realize you are emotionally moving forward without them, the emotional protection they built starts cracking. And here's the strange psychological part. Avoidants often don't fully recognize someone's emotional value while they still have constant access to them. Familiar love can become emotionally muted to them because their nervous system focuses more on protecting independence than appreciating connection. But once access disappears, your value becomes emotionally visible. Now they notice your absence everywhere. Now they realize how safe you actually made them feel. Now they compare every interaction to the emotional connection they had with you. Now they start understanding that not everyone loved them with patience, depth, or emotional acceptance. And that realization creates emotional grief they weren't prepared for. Because avoidants are not emotionless, they are emotionally defensive. There's a huge difference. Most avoidants learned early in life that depending on people emotionally could lead to disappointment, pressure, rejection, criticism, or loss of freedom. So instead of becoming openly emotional, they trained themselves to suppress emotional needs altogether. But suppressed needs never disappear, they wait. And the moment you stop emotionally carrying the relationship for them, those buried feelings rise to the surface in ways they can't easily control anymore. This is why avoidants often become unexpectedly emotional after breakups, distance, or no contact. Not because they suddenly started caring overnight, but because emotional reality finally caught up to them. For the first time, they are forced to sit alone with emotions they spent months avoiding through distraction, work, detachment, independence, or emotional shutdown, and silence becomes dangerous for them. Because silence removes distraction. That's when they begin replaying things they ignored before. The way you understood them emotionally, the consistency you gave them, the comfort of your presence, the emotional safety they secretly depended on while pretending not to need anyone. And eventually, they reach a painful realization. They weren't as emotionally independent as they thought. They were emotionally attached the entire time. They just didn't know how to handle it. Another thing that finally forces an avoidant to face their true feelings for you is when they realize nobody affects them emotionally the way you did. At first, after creating distance, many avoidants try convincing themselves they made the right decision. They focus on freedom, distractions, work, hobbies, new conversations, or temporary emotional escapes. On the outside, it can even look like they moved on quickly, but internally, something feels off. Because emotional connection is not as easy to replace as avoidance pretend it is. The deeper the bond was, the harder it becomes for them to recreate it somewhere else. And eventually, they start noticing that the emotional calm they felt with you is missing everywhere they go. New people may seem exciting at first. Surface level interactions feel safer, no vulnerability, no pressure, no emotional exposure. But over time, those connections start feeling emotionally empty because avoidants secretly crave depth even while running from it. That's the contradiction inside them. They want love, they want connection, they want emotional safety. But the moment love becomes emotionally real, their nervous system interprets it as danger instead of comfort. So they pull away to regulate themselves emotionally. But once enough time passes, they slowly begin understanding something painful. Distance removed the pressure, but it also removed the person who truly understood them. And that realization starts haunting them in quiet moments, especially late at night. Because avoidants are often very reflective and private. They may suppress emotions around others, but when they're alone, memories become louder. That's when they start emotionally revisiting the relationship from a completely different perspective. Suddenly, they notice things they overlooked before. The way you accepted parts of them they struggle to show. The patience you had with their inconsistency. The emotional warmth they quietly depended on. The comfort of knowing someone genuinely cared about them beneath all their walls. And this creates internal conflict, because now they're caught between two realities. The part of them that fears emotional vulnerability, and the part of them that deeply misses emotional closeness with you. That internal battle becomes exhausting, and this is where many avoidants finally begin confronting feelings they spent months denying. Not because someone forced them to, not because they were pressured, but because emotional comparison made the truth impossible to ignore. Nobody else feels like you. Nobody else reaches them emotionally the same way. Nobody else creates that mixture of comfort, safety, familiarity, and emotional intensity they experienced with you. And once an avoidant emotionally realizes someone is rare, fear of loss starts becoming stronger than fear of intimacy. That changes everything psychologically, because avoidants usually run from closeness, but real emotional loss forces them to confront attachment itself. For the first time, they stop asking, "How do I escape these feelings?" and start asking, "What if I actually lose this person forever?" That question alone can completely break through emotional avoidance. What finally pushes many avoidants into fully confronting their feelings for you is when they realize you are no longer emotionally chasing them. Because as long as you continue pursuing them, explaining yourself repeatedly, or emotionally waiting around, part of the avoidant still feels psychologically protected. Even if they pull away, become inconsistent, or emotionally disappear for days or weeks, they subconsciously believe the connection is still available whenever they decide to return. And that emotional safety net allows them to keep avoiding deeper emotional accountability. This is why avoidants can sometimes stay emotionally disconnected for a very long time without fully facing what they feel. They know the relationship still emotionally exists in the background. They know your energy is still focused on them. They know they still have emotional access to you whenever loneliness, anxiety, or attachment start surfacing. But once your energy truly changes, the entire dynamic changes with it. Not through manipulation, not through pretending not to care, not through jealousy games, through genuine emotional exhaustion. You stop trying to prove your worth to them. You stop carrying every difficult conversation alone. You stop sending long emotional paragraphs trying to fix the connection. You stop shrinking your own needs just to avoid pushing them away. You stop abandoning yourself emotionally in order to maintain closeness with someone emotionally unavailable. And slowly, something terrifying begins happening inside the avoidant. They feel your emotional detachment becoming real. Not temporary, not emotional, real. That realization affects avoidants more deeply than they usually show externally. Because despite their distance, many avoidants become quietly dependent on emotionally safe people. They may not express attachment openly, they may act independent, but internally, they often rely heavily on the emotional stability certain people bring into their life, especially someone who consistently understood them without judging them. And when that emotional presence starts disappearing, the avoidant nervous system begins reacting in ways they don't fully understand themselves. At first, they may suppress it. They distract themselves with work, stay constantly busy, scroll endlessly, talk to other people, convince themselves they just miss the comfort, tell themselves they're simply lonely. But the deeper truth slowly becomes impossible to escape. They don't just miss attention, they miss you, your emotional energy, your consistency, your understanding, your calming presence, the emotional safety they secretly felt around you while pretending they didn't need anybody. And this is where avoidants begin entering emotional conflict internally. Because now two fears are fighting each other at the same time: the fear of intimacy and the fear of losing you permanently. For most avoidants, fear of intimacy usually wins in relationships. That's why they pull away when things become emotionally serious. Closeness activates vulnerability, responsibility, emotional exposure, and dependency, all things their nervous system associates with danger. But when emotional loss becomes real enough, something shifts psychologically. Fear of losing you starts becoming stronger than fear of closeness. That's the turning point, and it often happens quietly, late at night, during silence, after seeing your absence become normal, after realizing you're no longer emotionally available the same way, after noticing you stopped reacting emotionally to them, after feeling that the emotional door they relied on may actually be closing. That's when panic starts surfacing underneath their emotional shutdown. Not always dramatic panic. Sometimes it looks subtle, checking your social media repeatedly, thinking about texting you constantly, rereading old messages, randomly remembering tiny details about you, feeling jealous imagining you emotionally connecting with someone else, suddenly becoming emotional over memories they once ignored. Because once an avoidant senses permanent emotional loss, attachment becomes impossible to fully suppress anymore. And this is something people misunderstand about avoidance. Avoidants are not detached because they feel nothing. They detach because they feel emotions so deeply that vulnerability overwhelms them. So instead of processing emotions openly, they delay them, suppress them, intellectualize them, escape them. But emotions delayed are not emotions erased. Eventually they return, usually stronger, usually heavier, usually when silence forces the avoidant to finally sit alone with themselves. And during this stage, many avoidants begin realizing something painful. You were never actually asking for too much. You were asking for emotional consistency, communication, reassurance, presence, effort, closeness, normal emotional needs in a healthy relationship. But because avoidants often grew up associating emotional demands with pressure, criticism, disappointment, or loss of freedom, even healthy intimacy can feel emotionally threatening to them. So while you experienced their distance as rejection, they often experienced your closeness as emotional overwhelm. Not because your love was wrong, but because their nervous system was trained to fear dependency. And once they finally calm down enough to reflect honestly, guilt often begins surfacing. Not surface level guilt, deep emotional guilt. They begin replaying moments where you needed reassurance and they shut down instead. Moments where you tried communicating and they withdrew emotionally. Moments where you loved them patiently while they kept fighting their own feelings internally. And for the first time, they stop viewing the relationship only through their fear. They start seeing it through your pain. That perspective shift changes everything emotionally. Because once an avoidant truly empathizes with the hurt they caused someone they genuinely loved, suppressing their feelings becomes much harder than facing them. In the end, what finally forces an avoidant to get in touch with their true feelings for you is not pressure, it's emotional truth, the kind they can no longer run from. Because eventually, after enough silence, distance, reflection, and emotional loss, the avoidant reaches a moment where all the distractions stop working. The independence they once used to protect themselves no longer feels peaceful. The space they thought they needed no longer feels freeing. It feels empty. And that emptiness becomes impossible to ignore. Because deep down, avoidants do want love. They want emotional safety. They want connection. They want someone who sees past their walls without trying to control them. But many of them spend years believing they can only have love if they stay emotionally guarded, that vulnerability is dangerous. That dependence is weakness. That closeness will eventually cost them their freedom, identity, or emotional stability. So when real love finally enters their life, they often sabotage it before fully allowing themselves to experience it. Not because the connection lacked meaning, but because the connection meant too much. And that's the painful irony of avoidant attachment. The deeper they feel, the more they fear. But once they truly experience losing someone who genuinely mattered to them, something inside them starts changing permanently. For the first time, they begin understanding that avoiding emotions did not protect them from pain. It created a different kind of pain: regret. Regret for the conversations they avoided, the affection they held back, the reassurance they never gave, the vulnerability they were too afraid to express while they still had the chance. And regret affects avoidants deeply because they tend to replay emotions internally for a very long time. Long after the relationship ends. Long after the silence begins. Long after everyone assumes they moved on. Many avoidants silently carry emotional attachment for years while pretending they're fine externally. Because suppressing emotion is not the same as healing emotion. And eventually, they are forced to confront a truth they spent so long trying to escape. You mattered to them far more than they admitted. Your presence became part of their emotional stability. Your love reached parts of them they kept hidden from the world. Your consistency made them feel safe in ways they didn't fully appreciate until it disappeared. And once they emotionally understand that, denial becomes impossible. That's when avoidants often finally feel everything at once: the love, the attachment, the grief, the guilt, the longing, the fear of losing you forever. But by this stage, another realization also hits them hard. Love cannot survive forever without emotional action, because feelings alone are not enough. And this becomes the biggest lesson many avoidants eventually learn too late. The people who love you deeply will not wait forever to be chosen properly. Eventually, even the most patient person stops fighting for a connection they carry alone. Eventually, love without consistency becomes emotionally exhausting. Eventually, someone who begged for emotional closeness learns how to emotionally let go. And when avoidants finally realize that your absence may truly be permanent, that's often the moment they fully come face to face with the depth of their real feelings. Not because you forced them to, but because losing you removed every remaining place they had left to hide from themselves.